February 10th, 2001. Scarcely 2 weeks had gone by, and already we were on our way back out to work in the cave. We admit we have become obsessed with the idea of getting through that passage, which was a sign of how exciting our lives were at the time. It's not that we think there is going to be something great beyond the passage, it's just we like the idea of being the first humans on the face of the planet to set foot inside of the virgin part of the cave. Although if we found a hidden treasure, that would be fine with us. We got a late start and drove part of the way in the dark. When I tell people that I go caving at night, they wonder why. They don't stop to think that it's always night once you're inside the cave. All the way out to Mystery Cave, we talked about new ideas to speed up our work. B also told me that he talked to some caver friends of his that came up with an explanation about the rumbling noise. They thought it might be the sound of water deep within the cave, possibly a waterfall. They couldn't really explain why the noise seemed to come and go, though. To me, it's just one more reason to get through, so we can solve that mystery. This trip we took B's dog, Whip. She's a Jack Russell Terrier. I wasn't really concerned about taking the dog into the cave. We've taken her before, and she answers the call of nature before she goes in, and then waits until we get back out again. Also, she is well behaved when she's inside the cave. We simply had to lower her via a custom-made harness until she reached the bottom of the main drop. Then she negotiated the rest on her own. She loves to explore, but won't go out of our sight. She doesn't have a light attached to her, so she has to wait for us. Another reason why I didn't mind bringing Whip along was because we planned on putting her into the small hole to see how far into the passage she would go. That might give us an idea of what's on the other side. We knew that if there was a drop that we couldn't see, the dog would turn around and come right back out. Despite having to work in the dark of the night, we were able to rig up and get down pretty quickly. We didn't take as many tools as last time, plus we left some in the hole so we wouldn't have to haul them out and back in again. I did manage to get 2 more batteries for the drill for a total of 4, also a few more masonry drill bits. Even with the dog, we made pretty good time getting down. Then something bizarre happened that I can't quite explain. The dog began exploring as soon as we set her off the rope. She was in hog heaven, sniffing and darting around our feet. She would run from one person to the other as we made our way back to the worksite. However, at the point where the cave splits into 4 passages, the dog seemed to just run out of juice. She just stuck right by either B or me. That seemed kind of odd, and as we progressed further into the cave, she would actually just stay by B for the most part. She seemed edgy, like she saw something that she didn't like. As we approached the short drop-off before the hole, she stopped and would only come further after we coaxed her a little bit. The hair on her back stood completely on end. Finally, as we got to within 20 feet of the hole, she began to whimper and hide behind B. Her tail was between her legs, and she was cowering down on the ground. This was incredibly strange. I've seen her square off against dogs twice her size, but now she acted as if Satan himself was lurking in the darkness. I figured there must have been animals that used the cave as a home, and Whip was just smelling their scent. It was too bad that it upset her because there was no way she was going inside that passage. We decided that with this new development, i.e., nervous dog, one of us would work while the other stayed with the dog a few feet away from where we normally rested. We got right back into our routine of drilling, hammering, etc. With our extra supply of batteries, we were able to really push hard on the drill and not have to worry too much about using them up. This did not make our work any easier, but it did speed things up a little bit. Progress was still very slow. I really didn't mind it, though. My journal here goes on for a while about the progress that we were making. The entire time we worked, Whip didn't move. She just laid there on a rope bag, shivering. She would whimper from time to time, and one thing I didn't think about at the time was that she would not take her eyes off of that hole at all. We should have been more observant to this intuitive animal. We were on our fourth battery when the second bizarre thing happened to us. B was working. He had just finished drilling a hole and was getting ready to hammer the bullpen when he stopped working and looked inside of the hole. I was kicking back, almost asleep, and hardly paying attention to B. He had a light by his side to illuminate his work area, and I could see in the eerie glow a puzzled and intense look on his face. He looked over at me and shook his head. I asked him what was up. He said that he swore he just heard a strange noise emanating from the hole. He said it sounded like rock sliding on rock, sort of like a grinding sound. I assumed his ears were just ringing from the drill. He hadn't worn any earplugs this trip. He assured me that he heard what he said he heard. I didn't have a better explanation for him, so I just went back to dozing, and B sat in the quiet of the cave for a long time before he resumed his work. Also, he would stop from time to time to just listen for the noise again. B is very grounded and not one to pursue some imaginary sound. I believe he heard something, but I'm not too concerned about what it was. I assume we will figure it all out once we get through the passage. The final battery lasted another hour or so. We were sitting around talking about our progress when I decided to see if I could get my head through the hole. My head easily fit, but there was no way my shoulders were going in. As I was kneeling there contemplating how close we were, I noticed something that B overlooked. The wind had stopped. In all of the times I've been in the cave, I have always felt wind blowing through the hole. The last time we were out working on the cave, the wind was blowing worse than ever. Even earlier, we remember the breeze cooling us off, but now there was nothing. B said he did not know when it stopped, and the rumbling had ceased as well. It was very, very bizarre. This plain old cave was becoming mysterious. We talked for a long time in the dark of the cave and debated what could possibly be causing these unusual events to occur. I think part of the reason why we were sitting in the dark was because we were both too exhausted to move. We could come up with no reasonable explanation for the strange things happening in the cave, and after sitting for at least half an hour, we slowly loaded up our gear and started for the surface. Whip couldn't have been happier to get out of there. Once again, we left some of the tools in the cave. We just put them in the hole. Not enough people used the cave to worry about. Plus, we were too tired to care. We made a lot of progress on this trip. It helps to have the extra batteries. We still have a long way to go, but it sure is nice to see how far we've come. This is a picture of the progress that we'd made up until this point. The rest of the journal entry talks about climbing out of the cave, getting a room at the motel, and crashing. We were completely beat. In retrospect, I can't believe how casual we were about everything that was happening in the cave. At the time, the only thing we could think about was getting into the passage. Everything else was just a minor distraction. I do recall thinking that it would be nice to get in and see how the mechanics of the cave worked, where the wind was coming from, what was making the noises, etc. Now, weeks later, I think of my ignorance and naivete and I shiver. March 3rd and March 4th, 2001. It took us 3 weeks before we could get out back to the mystery cave again. Our attitudes have changed a bit since we first started the project. In the beginning, we looked at the whole thing as a fun adventure. On the drive out this time, our conversation was a little more subdued than before. We hadn't talked much since the last trip, not for any reason but scheduling conflicts, though. Instead of discussing ways of getting through the passage, we found ourselves talking about rational explanations for what happened. Neither one of us had any ideas that would explain the unusual occurrences we experienced on the last trip. We were amused to find out that neither one of us had talked much about the last trip to other people, which is a complete reversal from the other trips. It's been fun to report to friends and family about our progress. It's always fun to tell people about the tight squeeze we are going to have to go through to get into the passage. Most people have little desire to voluntarily subject themselves to incredibly tight places. Actually, neither do I, but I will do it in order to get to the other side. It's good motivation. We left town early in the afternoon to beat traffic. I don't really recall what time we finally got to the cave. Like I said, the mood was subdued. We got rigged up and started down. Obviously, B left the dog home this time. We took essentially the same gear as the last time. We left some of the tools in the hole to save our backs the agony of hauling the extra weight. Even with the gear, we got down in excellent time, and we really have a good system for getting up and down. There was only one minor mishap this trip. B scraped his arm on the descent. Not really bad, fortunately. We waited until we got all the way down to the hole to patch it up. It was just a superficial cut. While he was getting the wound cleaned up, I started working. We both took note that the breeze was back and the rumbling was present. We had 4 fresh batteries and 4 or maybe 3.5 fresh arms. I had high hopes this would be the day. It did start out pretty slow. When we first started working on the hole, the thickness was about 3 inches, and as we have enlarged the hole, the thickness has increased. As a result, our progress became slower. Still, we continued with as much energy as we could put into the work. The hole was big enough, at least, for me to put the hammer into the hole for reference, then put the camera into the hole and take a picture of Floyd's tomb. It is difficult to get the exact feel of the tomb, but the lowest point near the back of the picture is about 7 inches high. The width is about 20 to 24 inches. The hammer is a small 5-pound sledge. Note the abundance of rock on the passage floor. It's been nice to see the pile of broken rock below the hole get bigger and bigger. We have both realized that we are just going to have to put in a certain amount of work in order to get through, so we just get down to business. We don't usually talk much while we work, since one of us is making a lot of noise with the drill or hammer. Break times are used to chat momentarily about whatever topic pops into mind. The breaks take place whenever the guy who's working decides to switch roles. We both put in some pretty good work sessions. I have a little more stamina than B, but he gets just as much done in a shorter amount of time, due to his upper body strength. We still celebrate the small victories we encounter along the way, too. Whenever a section we've been working on crumbles, we cheer. On the rare occasion that a fist-sized rock falls from the entrance, we hoop and holler. That's one small chunk of earth that no longer separates us from whatever lies on the other side. I still harbor the fantasy that there is a hidden entrance to the other side of the passage, and years ago Spanish explorers hid their treasure in the cave and sealed up the entrance. And it's remained untouched until we come along and find it. B has a more realistic, although more mundane theory. He figures there's just more cave on the other side. I guess we'll find out who's right. This trip I wanted to see if we could speed up the work by using larger masonry bits. I purchased some good-sized ones at the hardware store at a good-sized price. One was larger in diameter than all the rest, and the other was smaller around but longer. I had pretty much concluded that the big one might be a little too big, and I was right. We tried to get it to go into the rock, but progress was very slow. We tried pushing for all we were worth, and all we got for it was tired. The larger bit just created too much friction area for our strength, and it might have worked with a hammer drill, but we didn't have one. The longer bit worked fine with our drill, though. We relied on it for most of the work we did this trip. I thought we were going to be out one bit and a drill and my hand when the bit broke off towards one end. I was pushing as hard as I could on the drill with the bit a few inches into the wall when it snapped. I nearly rammed the drill through the wall from pushing so hard. We were able to retrieve the bit and keep using it, minus a couple of inches. It still worked great. Only once in a great while did we resort to hammer and chisel. Work was proceeding as normal until about the time we were on our fourth battery. I was kneeling down and working the drill slowly into the wall at the time. I had my earplugs in, my safety glasses on, and was lost in my own thoughts. Suddenly, over the squeal of the drill wearing down on the rock, I heard a strange noise. It was loud. I could hear it over the noise of the drill, even though I had the earplugs in. At first, I thought it was just the drill bit doing its job on the cave. It would frequently complain by screeching and whining as we forced it into the wall. But this was different. It took me several seconds to comprehend that this was coming from inside the hole, and not the bit. I stopped drilling and yanked my earplugs out just in time to hear the most terrible scream I've ever heard trail off and echo into the darkness of the cavern. I stared wide-eyed at the hole. For several moments I didn't move, nor did I breathe. I turned to look at B. Moments earlier he had been lying on the rope bag catching a nap. Now he was standing upright, mouth open, with a look of concern on his face. I turned and looked into the hole again, half expecting to see a demon face staring back at me. Nothing was different in Floyd's tomb. I fixed my gaze on the back of the squeeze, where the limits of my light reached. There was no motion, only darkness beyond the reaches of my light. In the complete silence that followed, I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. Not another sound could be heard in that cave. Suddenly I heard a scraping noise behind me and I straightened up. I nearly knocked myself out, hitting my head on the overhang. It was just B moving to turn on his light, but I was so wired it nearly sent me to my grave. B spoke, and again I jumped. He said to get some rocks and put them into the hole. He explained that whatever animal had made the noise might be able to get through the hole. I immediately grabbed a few rocks and hoisted them through the opening. Using the handle of the sledgehammer, I slid the rocks as far back into the tunnel as I could reach, creating a wall between us and the other side. Since the squeeze was so small, it didn't take too long. The entire time I was doing this, however, I was thinking that the noise certainly did not come from an animal. I didn't know if B really thought it was, or if he was just trying to convince himself. I didn't say anything to him about what I thought. From the time it happened to the writing of this journal entry, which is 2 days later, I have tried to come up with some possible source for such noise. To describe it, I would say it sounded like a cross between a man screaming in fear and a cougar screaming in pain. It sounded like it came from the hole and was roughly 100 feet away. The horrific noise reverberated through the cave and through my ears. B estimated the scream lasted about 8 to 10 seconds. My best guess is about 5 seconds. 3 seconds while I was drilling, 1.5 seconds to drop the drill and yank the earplugs, and a half a second of sheer terror. It's difficult to tell how much time passes when you're listening to a solo from the depths of Hades. After I filled the back of the passage with rocks, we just sat there and listened to the silence. My breathing was a lot more rapid than usual. Neither of us spoke for quite some time. Finally, B suggested we get back to work, but keep an eye out for movement in the hole. We put a light in the passage that shined into the back of Floyd's tomb. It was only at this point that we realized the wind had stopped again, and the rumbling sound could no longer be heard. To say I was nervous would be an understatement. I didn't say anything to B, nor him to me. We just went back to drilling. B took over the work at this point, which was fine with me. I wasn't exactly worn out, but I didn't mind being further from the hole at this point either. B would stop from time to time to listen, and I sat watching him with my light on. I wasn't close to the entrance to the hole, but I still found myself looking behind me down to the passage to the still water. Every time my light would cast an unusual shadow, my heart would jump. My imagination was running wild. Oddly, B seemed to be less concerned about the strange noise than I was. After a short time, he seemed to be focused entirely on getting through the passage. I was still straining to listen above the sound of the drill. I heard nothing but the now familiar sound of carbide on stone. As I contemplated the possible scenarios which might play out on the other side of the passage, I found myself strangely getting somewhat excited again about getting through. It might have been fatigue taking its toll on my mind, or the thought of something valuable on the other side. My thoughts were broken when B let out a yell, possibly a curse word. He said the drill battery was dying, but he hadn't quite broken off a large relative section he was working on. He set the useless drill aside and picked up a hammer and bullpen. He started wheeling away at the hole we created bit by bit. After nearly 10 solid minutes of hammering, he sat back against the rock, sweating and nearly out of breath. The bullpen was still protruding from the cave wall. He held the hammer towards me, inviting me to take a few swings. I held up my hand and shook my head. I had been ready to exit the cave for quite a while now. He didn't press the issue, and without speaking, we both started gathering our gear we were going to take out. Once again, we stashed some of the tools inside the passage. I was first to start toward the top of the cave. Several times I had to stop and wait for B, though. Not because he was moving slow, I was just more than eager to get out. Few times have I felt better than that night, stepping out into the chilly night air. My journal talks about the rest of the evening, our dinner, our decision to get a motel and come back the next day, our lengthy discussion on the strange sounds we had heard, another mediocre night's sleep. I cannot believe that we were so willing to get right back into the cave after hearing that scream. Part of the reason I went along with the idea was because B seemed so indifferent to any possible dangers. Even if it were an animal, which I did not believe, but could offer no better explanation, weren't we possibly putting ourselves in harm's way? In retrospect, I still have difficulty understanding our thought process at the time. We were just too eager to discover the Virgin Cave passage. I now think it can be summed up with one word: testosterone.